Happy New Year, thrill seekers! How you doing? So today, for New Year's, for the first video of the new year, I would like to talk about something in Dogen's extensive record. This is yet another one of his New Year's Eve talks. And this one is kind of interesting, and it's a bit long, so I'm going to start off by reading it, and we'll see how much comments I can get in before I've gone over my time limit, and maybe I'll break it up into two parts. I don't know. We'll see. So here we go. This is titled by the translators Dwelling Thoroughly in the Mountains. As I've often said, the Dogen did not give these essays titles. These were talks, not even essays, but the translators did. So here goes. Great assembly. With more than 300 pieces of empty sky, I can buy one branch of plum blossoms at the end of the 12th month. And as I've been saying, the 12th month, in the way they would reckon 12 months back in those days, was around February or March, the way we reckon days. So that's why he's talking about plum blossoms. They blossom in like late February, early March. Which, with auspicious clouds at the top of the cliff and the moon above the cold valley, contains spring and warmth, promising sounds of laughter. So their end of the year was when winter ended and spring started, not when the solstice or whatever it's called, the equinox. Or is it called the equinox? It's not the equinox, it's the solstice. Anyway, when it's not that, it's when spring started. So that's why he's talking about spring. Study of the way should directly follow the Dharma manner of ancient Buddhas and previous ancestors. A deceased elder said we should direct ourselves toward how the Tathagata, that's the Buddha, practiced, which is the same meaning. Clouds and water brothers, that's monks. You have departed far from your home villages and have forever put aside family and kin. That's what they did. They forsaked their family and joined a monastery. Completely forget trying to control fame and fortune or right and wrong. Although we should diligently study the details of our practice activity and each and every dignified manner, first we must study the single affair of the ancient Buddha ancestors. This is abiding in the mountains. So he was on a kick at that time, saying that the way that you practiced then was to go off in the mountains and be a full-time monk. This is something I've talked about. I don't think it's necessary for us. Well, it's not necessary for everybody. Some people it's necessary, and he liked to encourage his monks and make them feel better by saying what you're doing is absolutely necessary. Put a pin in that. In ancient times, a monk asked great teacher Yunju, a Hongjue, ultimately, how is a monk? I'm not sure how is a monk. It's a funny question. Great teacher Yunju said, abiding well in the mountains. So what should a monk do? He should abide in the mountains. The monk did a prostration and arose. Great teacher Yunju said, how about you? The monk said, within the realms of good and bad, life and death, or favor and adversity, a monk's mind ultimately is immovable like a mountain. Great teacher Yunju immediately hit the monk, smacko, once with his staff, even worse, with a staff, bang, on the head, and said, you have betrayed the former sages and destroyed my descendants. Great teacher Yunju then asked the monk standing next to the first monk, how do you understand this? Which is pretty intimidating because he just hit the other guy. So what's he going to say? The monk made prostrations and stood up and said, a monk ultimately abides in the mountains, his eyes not seeing the colors black and yellow of sky and earth, his ears not hearing the music of bamboo and strings. I guess bamboo and strings is because they made instruments out of bamboo. Great teacher Yunju said, you have betrayed the former sages and destroyed my descendants. But he didn't hit that guy. Interesting. Let's keep going. Therefore, all of you, what the former sages and ancient Buddhas wish for is simply abiding well in the mountains. Means go up in the mountains and practice Zen. Already abiding in the mountains, so he's talking to people who are already doing that. All of you should meet together with the ancient Buddhas and previous ancestors. Even if you have not yet met together with the ancient Buddhas and previous ancestors, you should be delighted that you are abiding well in the mountains. Keeping and maintaining this matter without regressing or being turned around is itself single-minded engaging of the way. The world-honored one, which means the Buddha, said, "Sleeping in the mountain forests is what delights Buddhas. Diligent effort in towns does not please Buddhas." Okay. Therefore, great ancestral teachers on Vulture Peak, Shakyamuni, Mahakashapa, he mentions a whole bunch of great Zen masters of the past, so I'm going to skip that because it doesn't really matter, but he names about 10 great Zen masters, and he says, "They all simply abided in the mountains. Furthermore, even lay people who were noble wayfarers all hid themselves in deep mountains and left excellent examples, such as Mount Ji, Mount Nan, and so forth." Let's see, the footnote just says these were people who went up in the mountains. Okay, so let's keep going. Right now, if you are someone who has the mind of the way, at first you should seclude yourself and dwell in the mountain valleys. Ignorant people who are truly without the mind of the way, that's the mind to study Buddhism, who crave fame and love possessions, cannot abide in the mountains. All of you people already are dwelling in the mountains, so how could you not practice? Everyone, you should not betray the former sages or destroy my descendants. Truly, you must never dismiss abiding well in the mountains. Dwelling in the assembly throughout death and lifetimes is more excellent than dwelling with one's own flesh and blood. So I guess that's family. Flesh and blood meaning. As this is superior to one's own flesh and blood, we should practice and train, joining in harmony in accord with the Dharma. If you do not practice today, you will have spent 360 days in vain. I guess 360 days were what a year was back in those days. If you do not spend a single day in vain, you will not waste 360 days. The former ancestor Shito said, "Do not pass your time in vain," which is exactly the meaning of this. A person practicing and one not practicing are a person reflecting on oneself and not reflecting, respectively, which is the saying of an ancient sage that is clear and obvious and contains an admonition. Okay. Now here's the part that really interests me. Long ago, Master Foyan became fundraiser monk at Wu Wei Jun, and once hit his heel in the street and had some realization. So when he hit his heel in the street, he had a realization. Kind of like the guy who kicked the rock and had a realization. After returning to his temple, he brought this up to his teacher Wuzu Feian. Later, he was staying at the guest house, and one night, sitting, he stirred the fire and suddenly had a forceful realization. So he had another realization. Although this was the case, whenever he entered the teacher's room, he was never able to enter deeply into the inner sanctum, so to really understand it. Calmly, he asked Wuzu, his teacher, for instruction. Wuzu said, "I will express it for you with a parable. It is just like a person pulling an ox, and the ox passes by the window. Both horns and 4 hooves pass by, but only the tail cannot pass by." Now that's an old Buddhist story that I wasn't aware that Dogen ever referenced until I came across this passage. I spend a lot of time reading Shobo Genzo, but I'm not as familiar with Eihei Koroku. So as far as I know, he doesn't reference it in Shobo Genzo. Maybe he does. I have to look it up. But here he references it, and there's a reason I'm talking about this, and we'll get to it at the end. Wuzu instructed Foyan like this. Both horns and 4 hooves have passed by. Why is it that only the tail cannot pass by? People, look at this in detail in your Zen practice. And here the footnote says, Zen practice here is Sanzen, which Dogen sometimes uses interchangeably for Zazen. If so, this is an unusual instance of Dogen directly recommending reflection on a koan in meditation. And Sanzen usually means visiting a teacher, so it's not clear exactly what he means, and that's what the footnote is telling us. The world-honored one said, that's Buddha, "For example, it is like a great elephant passing by a window. The entire body has gone by, but only the tail cannot get by. Worldly people are also like this. Home leavers entering the way who altogether abandon associations, but only are not yet able to abandon name and gain, are like the elephant's tail not able to pass by." Because of this, remaining attachment Because of this remaining attachment, sorry, that's what he says, we transmigrate through the 6 destinies and in the 3 realms. Desire, form, and formlessness. Those are the realms. And are tossed around through birth and death. Therefore, although the elephant spoken of by the world-honored one and the ox spoken of by Wuzu are different, yet they are the same. Thus, we should know that if the tail has not yet been studied in practice, the horns also have not yet been studied. If the horns have already passed by, the tail has already passed by. Great Assembly, do you wish to understand the meaning of the horns and tail? Well, sure I do. What's Dogen going to tell us? Well, if my previous experiences with Dogen tell me anything, it's that he's going to be poetic, and we'll see. After a pause, Dogen said, leading the ox along, do not seek for a perfect balance point. The 3 realms are like duckweed. Sorry, let me read that again. The 3 realms are alike duckweed floating on the water. Okay, that's what it says. Studying the way, the tail has not yet passed by. On what day will the entire body pass by the window? Great Assembly, you have been standing for a long while. I respectfully hope you will take good care. And that's how he ends a lot of these. The people, the monks would stand when listening to these lectures. They didn't sit down. So they've been standing for a long time while he gave this lecture. And you've been watching this YouTube video for a long time while I've been talking about this lecture. So I had an incident where I was feeling kind of like I had reached a plateau in my Zen practice. I had understood some things and had some kind of revelation, but I still seemed to be stuck somewhere. And I went to Nishijima Roshi and I talked to him about this old story, because this is an old story I'd heard probably back when I was studying with Tim McCarthy back in Ohio. So long before I even got to Japan, I was familiar with this story of the ox passing. The way I heard it was not passing by a window, but passing through a window. So the image I always had was the ox or the elephant going through the window, and all the big parts, the horns, the big long horns, and the head and the hooves and everything, get through the window, but somehow the tail can't get through this window, which is a weird, absurd sort of image. And I felt like that's where I was with Nishijima Roshi in my practice at the time. And he said, there's no ox and there's no window. And I don't remember much more of the conversation than that, but he kind of got me off using that metaphor at all and got me into talking real to him, and into not being all, fancy Zen boy, and actually telling him what the problem was. And I guess I probably told him what the problem was, and we had a discussion, and then I went home. So what Dogen says here is, he says, if the horns have already passed by, the tail has passed by. And if the tail's not passed by, what day will the entire body pass by? So what Dogen seems to be saying to me is, you either get it or you don't. And he also says, though, this is the good part, he says, do not seek for a perfect balance point. And that is, for 40-odd years or 30-odd years, almost 40 years of Zen practice, this has been my perennial problem with it, and it's probably a problem for some of you who are practicing too, is you're searching for that perfect balance point, and you think once you find that perfect balance point, then everything will be hunky-dory. But that's not what he says, and over and over again, Dogen tells this. He talks about half realization being perfect just as it is, and not knowing and not understanding being absolute just as they are. So even if you don't understand anything, that's exactly where you need to be. And that's a hard one to learn, because all of us want the big revelation where everything happens and we got it all and we're all great forever and amen for that. Hey, it's great. I'm the most enlightened guy in the room. But that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen for anybody. It doesn't happen for Dogen. It doesn't happen for Buddha. It just, from birth to death, it's just like this. And that's where we need to try to settle. And need is a funny word, and everything I say about it is wrong, and that's just the way it is. You can't say anything perfect about this stuff. But that's the lesson, and I think if there's anything to be gotten from this, it's don't search for a perfect balance point. So there you go. Maybe I'll talk more about that, but I already said I'd talk more about the 4 views and all these other things. Anyway, if you want to hear more, leave me a comment and I'll try to go back to these things and do more about them. But that's the message for today. So Happy New Year. And if you want to send me some money to keep doing what I do for the rest of the year, you can go to the URL you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. There you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my really only ways of making a living these days, and I really appreciate your support. But as always, this is offered for free, so you don't gotta donate if you don't want to donate, and we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Hey Ziggy. It's too cold for you outside, huh? You want to stay here by the heater? Well, I respect that. We'll see you later. Bye, Ziggy.